Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 21st, 2025. I'm going to discuss today the question that many of you have written to me about and asked about, which is, do we think the peace treaty that President Trump put forward for Gaza will hold, and will it lead to a lasting peace? Well, I want to refer to an article by Gideon Levy, an Israeli journalist for Haaretz, who has been quite consistent in his criticism of not just the Netanyahu policy, but of the Israeli population for tolerating the genocide going on in Gaza. And in a sense, he comes across very often as a curmudgeon, but one who bolsters his arguments with articulate coverage of the actual situation on the ground. He's highly knowledgeable, he knows people involved, and therefore it caught my attention that his column from November 19th, titled "The Blessed Curse Redefining Israel, Global Limits, Gaza Shift, and a New Order," that it was surprisingly optimistic. And I'm going to read you a couple sections from that, and then I'll give you my comments on it. He said that he sees a positive potential arising from developments on the ground. And here's what he says is the basis for hope. Quote, "It's been a long time since we had such a change that is likely to augur hope," unquote. So what makes him hopeful? Quote, "The Israelis and the Palestinians are undergoing an accelerated internationalization of the conflict. The UN Security Council has approved a resolution that points in the right direction. Israel is being returned to its true dimensions at an encouraging speed, and the fate of the Palestinians is increasingly being removed from its exclusive control," that is, the exclusive control of Israel. "It's hard to ask for more. What was presented in Israel as a series of humiliating defeats is actually a collection of encouraging developments," end quote. Now, his main contention is that the intervention of the international community is a potential for protecting the Palestinians from the genocide they've been facing. And he said it offers Israel a chance to give up its arrogant belief that as a military superpower, it can do what it wants to the Palestinians while trampling on international law. Here's the relevant paragraph on that. "The superpower," referring to the United States, "has returned to being a superpower, and its client state, that is Israel, has returned to its natural place. The state of affairs in which it was hard to know who was in whose pocket, the blurring of roles between the superpower and its client state, which lasted for decades, has come to an end. This is good news for Israel. The megalomania is dead. The state's delusions of grandeur, of omnipotence, is finished." And he goes on to give a slightly backing away from that, as you'll see in this following paragraph. Quote, "Attacks whenever something happens that isn't to its liking, blatant ceasefire violations, assassinations, and acts of terror, Israel not only believes that when that happens, all is permitted to it, it is also convinced that it is permitted to no one else. This mindset has corrupted it, and perhaps now it will end. An Israel that is more modest in its ambitions and less armed with offensive weapons may have a chance of being more accepted in the region." Now, what he goes on to talk about is that you have a UN Security Council resolution which passed back, I guess, last week. And while there are problems with it, for example, it does not really endorse the idea of an independent Palestinian state. It would establish an international stabilization force to protect the fragile ceasefire, and then put the power to run the new government in Gaza in the hands of a board of peace with President Trump at its head, and hopefully other international leaders. Now, the problem is it guarantees Israeli control over 58% of Gaza. And it assigns to the multinational international security force the assignment of disarming the Hamas militants. Now, is it really conceivable that you could have a coalition of European states, Western states, Arab states, Asian states, putting together a military force that will stand up to Hamas? And is it also believable that Netanyahu will step aside and let that occur? Now, of course, Gideon Levy is very well aware of these problems, and his hope for a change in the thinking of the general population, which he talks about quite often, that it's the population of Israel that's tolerating this or supporting it, that perhaps a change is now upon us. Now, let's look at some of the aspects of that change. And I think these are very interesting. First of all, you have, because of social media coverage internationally of the genocide, an awareness of the genocide. And this has built up a growing opposition, largely in the global majority of the global South, but increasingly in the West. We've seen large demonstrations in many European cities, and we're seeing a revolt, especially among the Jewish population, against Israel. And this is something that's new, especially in the younger population, and also a rebellion within President Trump's Make America Great Again movement, where many leaders are standing up and saying, providing funds to Israel to kill Palestinians while denying money for infrastructure and manufacturing development in the United States is not America first, it's Israel first. Now, this has come to broad attention following the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who was raising this objection within the MAGA movement and had a lot of resonance from people such as Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, even Megyn Kelly and others. That is, there was a growing movement within the Republican Party calling for Trump to drop his support for the Netanyahu regime's policies. Now, there also is evidence, which will be coming out, has been coming out, that the supporters and defenders and protectors of Jeffrey Epstein are also the ones who are financing the advance of the Israeli police state. And we'll get to that next week, because I'll have an article coming out on that in the Executive Intelligence Review. But you have one other very profound indication of this: the vote in the New York City mayor's race, in which a young Muslim activist, Zohran Mamdani, was elected mayor with at least 1/3 of the city's Jewish vote. This was a profound slap in the face to the Zionist lobby in the United States, and especially to the Anti-Defamation League, which has called for a monitoring of Mamdani, has referred to him as an anti-Semite, and has been trying to lead a rebellion against him. And yet he still won handily over the former governor of New York, Cuomo. Now, what this also points to is the ineffectiveness of the weaponization of the term anti-Semite. Anyone who criticizes Israeli policy is labeled an anti-Semite. If you even want to discuss whether this is a genocide or not against the Palestinians, you must be an anti-Semite. If you question Netanyahu's acceptance of tens of billions of dollars in military and financial aid from the United States, you must be an anti-Semite according to the ADL. Well, this must mean that at least 1/3 of the Jewish voters of New York are anti-Semites. It must mean that the growing numbers in Israel that are protesting the Gaza confrontation, the Gaza slaughter, are anti-Semites. And that's simply not plausible. And so the door is open for a change. Now, the International Peace Coalition has specified 2 additional elements for what could make this a lasting peace. First is the adoption of the LaRouche Oasis Plan, a great infrastructure project of collaboration from all sides to produce fresh water from salinated water, and use that as the basis for greening the desert. This is a mutual benefit that incentivizes the commitment to peace. And that would be very important for resolving the ongoing confrontation between Israel and the Palestinians and its Arab neighbors. Secondly, freeing Marwan Barghouti, the respected Palestinian activist who's been in prison for 22 years, held under bogus charges, and who's been subject to brutal attacks in recent weeks, including one instigated by Ben-Gvir, the security minister of Israel. So freeing him would send a signal to the world that this is time for a change. Now, the problem is Netanyahu still has support of the messianic fundamentalists in the settlers movement and in the right wing in Israel generally, as well as from the Christian Zionists in the United States. They have slightly different conceptions of the messianic vision. For the Jewish participants in this, what's really a Zionist cult, their belief is that the triumph of Zionism will bring the Messiah finally to the Jewish people. The fundamentalist Christian view is that the return of the Jews to Israel and then their annihilation of all but 144,000 in the Battle of Armageddon will bring back Jesus. Now, theologically, these are both unsupportable arguments. In fact, you have to be a little bit delusional and a bit crazy to risk your life in support of them. But that's the reality in the Middle East. Will that be taken on? And if it is, then it means that Netanyahu will not be around that much longer as the pro-war, pro-genocide prime minister of Israel. Now, let me stop at that. There'll be more to come on this, but I want to call your attention to the extraordinary roundtable discussion on Venezuela and why Trump must not move for war against Venezuela that the Executive Intelligence Review presented yesterday. There'll be a link to it in the description section. Take the time to listen. Very profound discussion among people who are leaders in that region and internationally. And then later today, there will be an International Peace Coalition meeting, Zoom meeting at 11 a.m., and I'll be participating in that on the Epstein case. One final note. Tomorrow is the 52nd anniversary of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. This was a turning point in U.S. history, and it still exists as a stumbling block to real discussion and exposure of what are the forces that are putting the United States on a wartime footing. It's time for that to end. It's time to release all the documents. In the interest of transparency, whatever you need made clear, who's running drugs, who's running the war on terror, who's committed to censorship. The starting point is release all the documents. And so that's the marching orders for today, to support the moves toward the Venezuelan resolution peacefully and to get the documents released overall. So thanks for joining us this week. Stay tuned to the station for more updates as they come.